Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. So this episode, I am talking to Art Tavana again. Art is a former conservative columnist at Playboy and LA Weekly, and who is working on a social history of Guns N' Roses for ECW Press. If you are somebody who's been here for a minute, you'll know that Art and I originally talked back in February of this year. And this conversation is kind of an offspring of that conversation on a topic that we kind of touched on lightly, although we didn't really discuss it in that last conversation because it wasn't really germane to the conversation that we were trying to have. And that is our differing opinions on social media, which, just to go ahead and say, Art and I don't entirely agree on social media and the role that it plays, and whether it is a societal good or a societal bad, whether it's benefiting people or harming people. So I decided that since this is a topic in the news, once again, I mean always and forever, but again, especially recently, I wanted to go ahead and have this conversation with Art. And I also wanted to talk to him because he actually sat down and talked to Laura Loomer and did an article for it for Spectator. And I wanted to talk to him a bit about that. As always, all links in the show notes to all the pieces we discuss and our previous conversation if you want to go back and listen to that. So without going on too awful long in this intro, let's go ahead and get into my conversation with Art on social media and canceled people and all sorts of various other things. So here we go. All right, so today I'm talking with Art Tavana again. If you guys missed our first episode, I will link it in the show notes and you should go listen to it. But all of the many things that Art and I agree on, social media is one that we don't entirely agree on. So I will go ahead and kick this off by asking this question in the most binary, reductive social media way possible. Why do you hate social media, Art?
I don't hate social media. That would assume that I have a complete rejection of it. I think it's very useful in a lot of ways, and I obviously we've all benefited off it tremendously, especially if you're a writer or a journalist. But I think what bothers me the most about social media is the way people talk about it. Firstly, I think the media is essentially ignoring the crux of the problems that I have with social media, which is the way it's designed. The machinery of social media is the problem that I have with it. It's not necessarily. See, I think the problem as a conservative or a libertarian, when you talk about a critique of social media, the immediate assumption is that it's a First Amendment issue that I'm going to address, banning people like Laura Loomer and Alex Jones, or that I'm like talking about the bias of social media companies run by quote unquote liberals. Look, I've been to Silicon Valley. I used to work in marketing firms where we launched Silicon Valley tech startups. I've met the people that work at these companies. I was at a PR firm in 2008 when Twitter was just taking off, and we had people from Twitter and we had marketing people who were basically launching the use of social media with their celebrity clients and their corporate brands come to our conference rooms, sit down with us and explain to us how Twitter could be used essentially to manipulate consumers into engaging, quote unquote engaging, which is basically a more sanitized way of saying obsessing or being addicted to symbols and products and visual cues, and they were using the machinery of gambling. They were literally using online gambling techniques to seduce people into being addicted to the dopamine like responses, the immediate the affirmation that you get from a tweet or a comment or a like. And if you just look at Twitter, I'm going to pull it up right now just to look at it to remind myself of how disgusting it is. But if you look at the way Twitter looks even, there's a bell that goes off the minute you get someone that likes something that you said or has a comment about something you said. There's this flash across the screen of an individual's name, especially if they're verified, if they've shared something you've said. It's literally like gambling or fantasy football, and it incentivizes addiction. And the scary part about it is, the problem that I have with it the most is that it's essentially a prison. We're locked in. We can't escape Twitter or social media. I mean, people say, look, I'm sure, I mean, you're a libertarian, so you value individual agency above, group or, certainly regulation of social media. But the argument a lot of libertarians make, sort of the Nick Gillespies of the world and the Reason crowd, is, well, just don't use it. You have an individual choice. You can unplug from it. If you think this is a problem, unplug from it. Well, I mean, I understand that point, but that same argument then should be made to any form of addiction. Just don't do it. You have a gambling addiction, well, just don't gamble. You have a cocaine addiction, just don't take coke. Or, if you have a porn addiction, just don't watch porn. Well, it's not that easy. Once your brain has been conditioned through this weird sort of Pavlovian response to attention and, adoration or hate even, it's completely out of our control. I think the focus on social media bias and the conservatives who are feeling like they're being if I was I'm a conservative libertarian. If I was deplatformed by Twitter, I'd be celebrating secretly. It'd be one of those things. It's like, you ever have a job you really hated, but you didn't have the guts to quit? That's exactly how I'd feel if I got my Twitter banned. I'd be secretly dejected and sad. I'd be sad about the fact that I just lost my communication platform to advertise my work. But deep down inside of my heart, I'd be celebrating at the freedom and the liberation that comes from removing myself from something that incentivizes bad behavior. It really does. The one thing about it that no one ever it's worse than prison, right? In prison, your warden or your cell block, your bad behavior is not incentivized, it's punished. On Twitter, bad behavior is incentivized until the point where the social media company, for whatever unexplained reason, decides to punish you. So people like Laura Loomer and Alex Jones were fed power, followers, money, attention, hero worship, because of the way social media is designed, the machinery of it, right? And then the minute the social media companies felt, okay, no, this is going too far. We have to destroy this. This is why I disagree with conservatives. I fully believe Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey are good people. I know this is like a shocking thing to say. I think they actually wanted to create a platform for communication, for alleviating boredom and sort of making society connected and making people able to share things like raw emotions or raw feelings. It's kind of a beautiful concept, but it's out of their control. It is sort of like the Battlestar Galactica or Terminator kind of sci-fi horror story, which is that they didn't create it to be what it became, but it became out of their control. And now they're trying to regulate it in their own way, and they're trying to fix it, but they can't. It's completely out of their control. It is a cybernetic extension of our brain at this point, and none of us have any control over it. I want to quit. I hate social media, okay? I despise it. I think it's I think it's a great plague of our time, right? I can't quit. I literally can't quit. I sit there every day. I'm like, I should delete my Twitter. What's the point? What's the point of engaging with stupidity all day? What's the point of constantly deflecting hate and bigotry and stupidity 24 hours a day? What am I gaining from this? Well, the only thing I'm gaining from it is attention from my work. I'm doing it because it puts a spotlight on my articles, right? It is an advertising vehicle for my work. But on the flip side, it's abusive. It's causing, I fully believe it's causing some form of mental illness that we don't even understand yet. I fully believe that it's causing irreparable damage to young people's views of themselves. Certainly Instagram is. I think Instagram is far worse than sort of photoshopping and body positivity debates that are happening about magazine covers. I think Instagram is the one that's destroying the youth's conception of beauty and all that sort of stuff that, these like ignorant sort of, money bag liberal, activists like Jamila Jamil are completely ignoring is what Instagram is doing to the youth, because you can't control it. How do you regulate it? You can't regulate social media. They'll just create another platform. You can't regulate the internet because there's always going to be someone that could hack it. So anyway, that's my problem with social media. It's not a free speech or a First Amendment issue. It's not the conservative talking point. It's a very I think it's more about the addictive nature of it.
And it's fascinating because I am one of those people that like the notification bell gets me, but I'm so OCD about notifications on my phone, period. Like, I do not understand people who have like the little inbox and have like thousands of unread emails. I'm like, that would drive me like insane. Like, I can't do that. But a thing that I got to watch firsthand is my husband's Twitter account actually got nuked by Twitter.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was a fascinating thing to watch because it was like, it got nuked by Twitter, and for what it's worth, he's more popular than I am and had more followers and has his own podcast and all that stuff. But And since then, he has started another Twitter account, which hopefully Twitter doesn't listen to this podcast. Don't listen to this. Don't hear this, Jack. But it was fascinating to watch because I was like, well, how do you feel about that? Because like, he was online in like a different way than I am, but both of us were extremely online, but his niche was a little different than mine. And I asked him, I'm like, okay, so how does this feel like you don't have a Twitter account anymore? And he's like, you know what? I feel like fine.
Yeah.
And even on his new account, like obviously he uses it to promote his podcast and his writings and stuff like that. But I've noticed that ever since he set up the new account, he doesn't engage in the same way that he did on the old account. He doesn't post the same way. He doesn't post as much, and it's really more confined to his work. And occasionally, like, the different posts here and there that more resemble his old account. But it's been fascinating to actually watch this happen to somebody, like, in person that you know and live with, and watch them be like, you know what? It's fine. Like, I feel okay. Like, I'm not about to like jump off a bridge or anything. So,
well, like I said, it's liberating. I fully believe, again, I think most people who are banned, like I think even Laura Loomer, and this is what I told her this to her face. I think there's an extreme form of liberation that comes from getting banned from social media. I think it is, if it's the way you make money, if it's the way you sort of pay your bills, there's a tragic component to this, but I think there's an extremely refreshing. It's almost like, again, like I said, it's like putting the job that you never had the gut. I'm getting fired from a job that you never had the guts to quit, or getting broken up from a relationship that you couldn't actually, break up yourself. It is liberating, and I think that's maybe somewhat of what your husband might be experiencing, because he's kind of like, wow, I don't have to worry about waking up every morning and thinking about Twitter. I think there's, again, it incentivizes a weird kind of behavior, and they're constantly monitoring our behavior. They're also looking at our IPs, our device IDs. They're looking at the way we behave so they can sell our data and sell not just our data. It's not some like evil genius kind of paranoid, weird conspiracy theory, but they're selling their platform to marketers and advertisers. And to do this, they have to create a platform where they can use every person as a vehicle for advertising. And the same thing is happening on Facebook. I mean, more so probably on Facebook than Twitter, because Twitter doesn't really have that sort of component as much. It uses Twitter moments to advertise things. I fully believe there's going to be exposés and leaks within Twitter in the coming years that exposes some very nefarious behavior happening when it comes to Twitter moments and how they decide what to write, and who are the people creating these stories, and who are the people, like, how are they deciding who fits into which moment. And the machinery of once sort of the machinery of the media side of Twitter is exposed, I think we're going to have a very interesting reaction to what Twitter is actually doing as a media company, not just as a social media company, but as an actual media publishing company in their own way. But I have a lot of problems with it. I think that it's causing a lot of irreparable, our old brain is taking over. It's flight or fight responses, in the sense that we're constantly waking up and being triggered into, either defending yourself or attacking. That's really all you do. You defend yourself or you attack. And when you share something, and I do this all the time, I share stuff that I feel is nonpartisan. So I share stuff about, old movies or facts about weird things in history, or, whatever, the stuff I'm reading or the stuff that comes to my mind during a walk or whatever. And then all of a sudden someone turns it into a fight or a debate. It has to be, it leads immediately to a nasty, they'll either correct your tweet, which there's no correction to be made, but they'll correct it because they're just they're trolls. They're trolling you, right? Or they'll retweet you and debate you on it. And it's like, why? What is the entire point of Twitter to fight with people? And if so, is that what Twitter is incentivizing? To fight and argue? Are we becoming a society that is based entirely on not civil discourse or conversation, but fighting? Because a civil discourse and conversation, there's a way to have that with good manners and decency and civility, and you can actually talk to someone in a way where, you don't immediately cause a weird sort of, fight. But that's not what Twitter is designed to do, and I think it's a problem. It's even Sean Parker even talked about Facebook intentionally making people addicted to Facebook. I mean, if there's a company creating a platform designed to make children addicted to it to the point where they can't remove themselves from it, where it dictates to every aspect of their life. How could we possibly support it? Like how completely conditioned and ignorant and zombie have we become to be okay with that? If a platform that Mark Zuckerberg owns is controlling essentially behavior and conditioning children to be addicted to it, even if it's positive, how can we be okay with that? You know what I mean? Like to me as a parent, there's no chance I'd let my children use social media. If I was a parent, I'm not a parent, but if I was, they would not be touching a social media account ever until they were 18 years old, period. And I think it's actually a very mild form of parental neglect, or a problem that needs to be addressed if you're letting your children use this stuff before they're 18. But that's a whole different conversation. Yeah,
especially given the current situations with Kyle, whose last name I can't even pronounce, but anyway.
Right.
Everybody knows who I'm talking about, but the idea of people underage using social media. But a topic that you touched on that I think is an important thing to kind of distinguish is, I think on social media, and I am way more Pollyanna-ish about this than you are.
Sure.
You get out of it what you put into it. And I've always said, especially with Twitter and to a different extent Facebook, which I can't stand Facebook. I don't go on Facebook. The interface just annoys me for some godforsaken reason.
Right.
And especially on Instagram, because the whole following posting thing is completely different than any other platform. It's the most radical form of free association you can possibly have, because it's entirely up to you who you follow, who you don't follow, who you choose to speak to, who you choose to ignore. It's entirely you-centric. So, like you said, if you post up something and some dumbass rolls up in your mentions and wants to fight with you about it, that's on you whether you wish to engage that person or not. Like, you can ignore them, you can mute them, you can block them, you can do whatever, and it's perfectly socially acceptable to do any of those things.
Right.
So I think a lot of people who have a bad experience with social media, especially with Twitter, because that really seems to be like the nexus of what everybody wants to argue about right now, even more so than Facebook, which is odd because I just found out that Facebook still has way, way, way more many people on it than Twitter. Like, even Instagram has more people on it than Twitter, but
right.
Twitter has this obviously like this immediate like response time. So what you choose to respond to and how you choose to respond to it really dictates your experience on Twitter and on social media in general. And I almost kind of wish that we can go back to like Internet 101, like everything like when people back in the 90s and 2000s, when people were starting to get on the internet and get on message boards and stuff like that, the first thing that they always told you is don't feed the trolls. So don't feed the trolls on Twitter either, people. Like, we need to go back to like understanding how to interact with people on the internet. And yes, social media is different than message boards and how things were back in the day, but a lot of those old rules still apply, but everybody seems to have forgotten them, and they seem to think that like just because somebody responds a certain way to your post that you need to respond back. And that's like, you really don't. I mean, you can straight up ignore somebody on Twitter, and it's like, what's anybody going to say about it?
I think it's a fair point. It's the libertarian point. It's the free choice point, and I understand that. But I think that they've created a machine where it removes free choice. Because again, I know countless people who hate it and want to remove themselves from it, but can't. They're absolutely addicted to it. It is absolutely taking over a portion of our brain and has connected us to this feed and the responses we get and the feedback and the constant loop of dopamine that you're on. You're on a loop of dopamine that is being shot at you every time you send something out to the internet, and the way people respond to it changes the way your brain actually physically works. There's actual chemical responses, and there's been studies on this, how Twitter affects the brain. I mean, nobody is addressing this, and this is why we can talk more about the BuzzFeed story, but I mean, the closest we ever got to someone sort of vaguely addressing this was the New York Times piece on right-wing radicalism, on the YouTube argument, on the algorithms. But the problem with that piece was it only talked about the algorithm. It didn't talk about the intent behind the algorithm, and then also because YouTube wouldn't comment on it. But yeah, I think that you're right. It is free choice. But again, I sometimes make the Vietnam argument, which is not a fair one, but it's actually it's illuminating, right? It's like if you're a soldier who's been drafted into the military in the 70s and you're going to Vietnam, yeah, you have free choice. You can do whatever you want. I mean, you can kill the enemy, you can do bad, you can cause harm to civilians, you can behave, you can listen to your generals, you have free choice, right? But you've been conditioned to not have free choice. You've been trained and you've been taught to remove yourself of having free individual choice in that environment. And then what happens is the environment becomes so chaotic that you're now an individual who doesn't have free choice, who's been taught to respond a certain way, who is then driven towards madness, and you're in this like engulfed hell, and you're just trying to survive, and then you can't get out of it, because how do you get out? Do you get out? If you get out, you've abandoned your post. You've sort of, you've essentially erased yourself from existence, right? You certainly can't go back to your home country. If you do, you'll go to jail for treason or whatever. And then that's sort of the lock-in mechanism of social media. You can't just leave it. I can't leave social media. If I left Twitter, like I would, my 85% of the traffic driven to my work would probably go away. No one would even know that I published an article. Like literally nobody would know that I just published an article unless it was for like the New York Times and the front page. So that's a problem when you're a writer or a journalist. You cannot get there is free choice literally, but there is no incentive for free choice. So that's where I disagree with the libertarian point of like, oh, you can just like, you can do whatever you want and people are going to react to you a certain way and you don't have to use it. You can just turn it off but yeah, that's true. That's inherently like down to the fundamentals of it. You're right. But it's like Los Angeles. Everyone's like, you can use public transportation. Like all these like really sort of environmentalist hippies in LA, you can use public transportation. You can walk. You don't have to own a car. You can just, you don't have to own a car in Los Angeles. But if you don't own a car in Los Angeles, your life is going to be living hell. You can do a lot of good for the environment by not owning a car. But your life is going to be immeasurably more difficult, and you're going to have a lot of issues that are really sort of unbearable, even for the sake of the environment. And that's sort of the problem with social media. It doesn't let you escape. I don't really know anybody at this point who has no social media accounts, except like really old, maybe septuagenarian types. But even they have like Facebook. Really good book about this. I think your readers would like. I mean, your listeners and you even. I don't know if you've read it, but you might have. It's the latest PJ O'Rourke book. None of Your Business. It was framed like an economic book, but it's really a book about social media and the effect of social media and the different views of social media, like the baby boomers versus the millennials and the Gen Xers. And he makes a lot of good points about, the various reasons why he doesn't use Twitter. He has a Twitter, but he does not use it. And he talked about why, and I completely relate. I think it's also a weird alleviation for boredom, because we're all bored in modern society. That's just the bottom line. We're all bored because there are none. The struggles that we had in ancient times, or even as going back to even the 50s or the 40s or the 30s, those struggles are all been alleviated. Like even something as simple as doing laundry has been sort of the laundry machine has changed that dynamic. We have so much free time to kill that we don't know what to do with ourselves, and so we're using social media to kill that free time, and we're being incentivized to do bad things on social media constantly. That's where I disagree with your point, is that it's not just what you put into it. It's how careful, how strong-willed you are to avoid the temptations of social media. I think Laura Loomer, someone who has mental illness, right, in their family, or who is actually mentally ill, which I believe to some extent Laura Loomer is. Someone like that didn't go on social media and go, well, I can put whatever I want into this and just like it's fine and we'll all be good. They're crazy. So they're being incentivized by a system that actually feeds on your insanity and your craziness. It benefits when you're not okay. They're like, I describe it when they get banned. I describe it like the pit boss at a casino realizing you're rigging their system. Someone like Laura Loomer was rigging Twitter. Like they figured out Twitter. They figured out that if you say completely insane things, you will get 100,000 retweets. You'll be a CNN story. You will be on Fox News. Okay. If you do a video and you put it on Twitter of you doing something completely bizarre and insane, where you set a fire, right, you're going to be a celebrity. Now, if social media didn't exist, these people would not be doing that. They would be working at an Applebee's as a waitress or something. They'd be like, they'd be like a difficult person at the office. They'd be working at a gas station yelling at people. I don't know what they'd be doing, but they certainly wouldn't be controlling the narrative of the mainstream media, which is why I think they get banned. I think they get banned because Twitter realizes, oh my God, this person who's not okay is actually able to control the headlines for a week of stories, from the cable news to the New York Times to the fucking New Yorker. The New Yorker profiled Laura Loomer. I mean, seriously, how and why do you think that happened? That happened because she mastered how to manipulate people on social media, and she went to the extreme. Like Milo, she pushed it too far. And when you push it too far, the pit boss walks into the casino and says, "You're card counting. Get the fuck out of here." They card counted, and they pushed it too far and they got caught. But and there's people like us who don't card count, who don't push it too far, who keep a balance, right? A healthy balance. But, I don't really see it being a good thing. I think if this is like 40, if this is 40 years ago or something like that, we'd be like, writers would be hired because they're good writers. Writers are not being hired because they're good on social media. Like, we're being hired because we're good at marketing. It's terrible. I think that the idea that a writer should be hired at a news organization because they're good at Twitter is just atrocious to me. And I think it's going to end. By the way, all this blocking, I was thinking about this the other day, all this blocking that's happening, everyone's blocking each other, right? Like, everyone's blocking someone they disagree with or muting them. And like, what's going to be the outcome of that in 10 years? The outcome of that in 10 years is no one's going to be able to interact or see the conversations people they don't like or disagree with. So we're going to get to a point where everything I'm talking about might actually go away because it's going to be a complete silo. Like, we're all going to be in our little silos, and we're not going to have interaction with the other side at all because we can't even see them anymore because we've blocked everybody out of our conversation. So we're just going to be like feeding each other like, oh my God, you're right. Oh yeah, you're great. Like this positive affirmation loop. And it's going to be even more boring and shitty.
Yeah. That's kind of why I am very, very gentle with the mute and block button because that's not my jam, but I understand that's other people's jam, and I understand that other people get shit on Twitter that I don't get. But a point that you made, and this is something that does bother me too, is the performative nature of Twitter and how you can get this huge following by being completely outrageous. And to the point now where like you can get rewarded with like an actual job at like an actual publication for tweeting things like fuck white people. Like, sure. What the fuck?
I know.
But again, I think this
terrifying.
Yeah, and I think, and this kind of touches on the Laura Loomer, Katie McHugh situation, and kind of also how we approach Twitter and social media is that we both are probably a good 10 years older than both of them.
Sure.
And I think it's a little different, especially when you are older and you do understand that what you put out there as your persona is going to stick to you no matter what you do past that. But I think a lot of young people don't really understand that. And so you do these things and you get a massive following. And I think we can both agree that like if either one of us was more extreme or did more bizarre performative shit, or even I, as a woman, I'll say it, if I did things a little differently, not trying to put anybody on blast, I would have more followers. But that's just not my style. So I don't do that. But since we are here and we are talking about Laura and Katie, I guess now would be a good time to talk about the fact that you sat down and had coffee with the queen of the canceled.
The queen of the canceled.
Well, I mean, she's pretty much queen of the canceled.
Yeah, I guess she is, isn't she? Yeah, I did. I had coffee with her. So I met Laura Loomer at Politicon because I was just there, and she was like in Michael Avenatti's face, and it was a bizarre scene. And I was like, this woman is just relentless, and there's something seriously wrong with her. But what is wrong with her? Because the New Yorker profile, which I thought was fine, certainly not the Daily Beast or anybody else, no one's investigated the psychology of someone like this. I always think about that book, Rebel Without a Cause, that the movie was based on, where They study essentially the thinking and the patterns of imprisoned sociopaths. And like that is how I approach every profile. Is I want to figure out the motivation behind the madness. And we could talk about the BuzzFeed thing a little bit more, but so my decision to sit down with her was, I think something's wrong with you. I told her this too, by the way. This is not secret. This is fully in the open. I think something's wrong with you. I'm intrigued because you're very entertaining, and not in a healthy way, but you're entertaining like a John Waters character or like a really horrible British sitcom from the 90s. Intriguing.
Can I break in and ask a question real quick just before
Sure.
I forget? Just because I'm always fascinated when people talk to people from the alt-right, far-right, new right, whatever the hell you want to call them now.
Yeah.
Did you get any kind of real pushback, like either when you were proposing the piece, when you told people that you wanted to sit down with Laura after the piece was published? Like, did you really get like any kind of like negativity or pushback on it?
No, I didn't get. You talking about the post publication or like pitching the story?
Either. I mean, and I know, just as an aside for everybody listening to this, this piece is posted in The Spectator, and I will put the links in the show notes. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, so it was supposed to run in Penthouse. So this is a Penthouse. Penthouse was intrigued. The story, I didn't pitch to do the story in the first place. Let me just put that out there. I met Laura. I was intrigued. I wanted to write about her. But I felt at that point, before she was entirely canceled, that it was to be perfectly frank, it was like a bad career move. I felt like writing about her was going to put me in a really uncompromising situation. I didn't feel like it was like the right time. I wanted to wait for the smoke to clear. That's what I like to do. I like to wait for the smoke to clear, and then I could observe the subject with no fear, no sort of concern, and even from their part, no incentive. Like Laura Loomer has nothing to lose at this point. She has nothing to gain, nothing to lose. It's over. Her social media presence is finished. Her career will probably outlast a lot of people. Surprised. I think she's smarter than people give her credit for. But I think that the pushback. So Penthouse decided to not publish the piece. That was my first pushback, and the reason for that was there was a structural change in the management at Penthouse, and the new individual who came in did not want to publish a story with Laura Loomer, about Laura Loomer. So that was the first pushback. The piece got canceled. So I had this article, and I was like, what do I do with it? And I'm like, well, I don't want to pitch like mainstream media organizations because they're going to edit it in a way. We can talk about the Katie McHugh piece as it relates to this, but they're going to edit it in a way to, try to establish that this person is a racist and a bigot and a monster, and you shouldn't be like her, and this is why she's a horrible person. To me, that's already been established in the media. There's no need for me to reestablish that point of view. That's already been it's concrete. So I didn't do that. So I found somebody at The Spectator that I thought was an honest and chill, fair person, and we decided to publish it there. They published it with little to no changes to the original copy, which I thought was great. And no pushback post-publication. I sent it to people on the left because I wanted to get their perspective on it, because I always do that. I send my stories to people on the left and the right. Private emails. These are not like tweets. These are private emails. And everyone who read it liked it. Everyone who read it said it was very fair. It was critical, but it wasn't a hit piece. And it wasn't a sort of, overly flattering, kind of, it's like when someone tries to profile somebody and they put their style ahead of the story. I do that often, and I hate when I do that because I just have this tendency to put my style ahead of the journalism. I'm more of a writer than a journalist. I don't necessarily view myself as a journalist. I'm just a journalist by trade, not by like personality style or like writing style. So I didn't do that with Laura Loomer. I tried to be as journalistic as possible. So the interesting part about it was there was no pushback except for Laura. I think Laura had some problems with it, and God bless her. She expressed herself very honestly and openly, and to me, and on her various social media things that she still has, which is like I think some like thing called Telegram or something.
Like I don't understand how it works. I have a Telegram account. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it.
Yeah, it reminds me of Snapchat. I didn't understand how Snapchat worked until like 5 years after Snapchat came out. So that's with Terragram or whatever it is. So like she went on there and expressed some problems with the piece. And I had to say, it's funny because I agreed with some of the problems she had with the piece. She had a problem with the photo. The photo was like this, and Spectator, like, I don't really care. I'll criticize them about this. The photo was terrible. They used a photo of her with like Jacob Wall, and it was like a culture, like that weird Instagram, that weird like far right Instagram thing. And they used one of their photos with their freaking watermark on it, and it was embarrassing. I was like, what is this photo? Like, you could have found anything on like anywhere, any sort of sharing site, and found something better than this. So I had a problem with the photo use. There was one correction, and it was because one of the sources was not entirely accurate with me about their title.
Yeah, I saw that.
So I had to like figure out this person's title through like a third source that knew this person. It was like, okay, I'm like, why do I? So that was my fault, but it wasn't really an issue. It's like the smallest correction possible. But yeah, it was a great piece. I thought it was fine. No pushback. I think most people are afraid to share it. Most people were more uncomfortable with anything with Laura Loomer. So the idea of a Laura Loomer story wasn't going to go public a lot. Like, I don't think this is going to be retweeted by people at BuzzFeed with commentary. This wasn't going to be shared by like the paleo conservatives that hate her. This wasn't going to be shared by the National Review crowd and so forth. I mean, they're going to ignore it because they don't take her seriously. They think she's an unserious, psycho. And in many ways, maybe she is, but that wasn't my intention. It wasn't a political story. I don't write political profiles in the sense that I'm not working for Politico where I'm going to go on the road with John Kasich and sit in his limo and talk to him about his policy. This is a story about a person's psychology and how they got to the point they got to. I wanted to diagnose her to the best of my abilities and to figure out how she became who she became. And I think, I don't know, I did a pretty good job. I think the struggle that I had with the piece is it's sad. It's really tragic, but you have to kind of, in the world we live in now, you can't really just be completely ruthless and open and just write the story you want to write fully. You have to kind of sit back and go, well, I mean, God, this sentence, I think like this will lead to like 5,000 people calling me, complicit in Laura Loomer's, point of view or something. I don't know. Like, you have to think about these things, and I don't like that. I think we've been constrained. We've been shackled by the fear of the mob on social media so much as writers. We can't avoid it. I don't think there's any writer in America right now who is completely honest, because I think we're all a little afraid. Not as, some more than others. I mean, some are completely falsifying their entire personality and grifting and so forth. But there's others who are like me, who feel like the way I felt in college when I wrote a paper. I wasn't going to use certain language or say certain things. I'm like, my professor, I already know who my professor is. This person is not going to like this. I'm going to get an F. I don't want to get an F. You know what I mean? So there's a little bit of a tendency of like self-correcting yourself in these stories. So I didn't like that. I felt very, if you read some of my older profiles with celebrities like Sasha Grey and so forth, you can feel like a completely unrestrained, liberated writer. This is pre-Donald Trump. And then if you look at post-Donald Trump, you sort of see someone who's like a little more careful, which is so tragic. And I think we're all like that. I think writers who don't admit that are lying to themselves. They lack self-awareness, or they're complete charlatans. I think we are sort of all controlling ourselves a little bit. And like, writing about Laura Loomer requires a lot of tragically self-censoring.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that question is because I have seen other people get pushback for wanting to write about certain people or even talk to certain people. And I guess this is a good way of any to segue into the BuzzFeed piece, which I'll try to give people a little bit of a backstory, because Katie McHugh is not as well known as Laura Loomer. Like, everybody knows who Laura Loomer is. Right. Katie McHugh was somebody who actually, it's odd that both of these pieces kind of came out somewhat around the same time. Like, the Katie McHugh piece came out at the beginning of May. Yours came out at the end of May. But they both followed the trajectory of two different people who have kind of ended up in the same spot, kind of for the same reasons, but on a completely different trajectory. So, For those of you who don't know who Katie McHugh is, she was a writer for Breitbart for a moment, and she also wrote for Daily Caller for a while, and then wrote for some less than wonderful publications after she got fired from Breitbart. Again, I will put the links in the show notes below, because the whole piece is just like, it's really kind of sad and tragic, but they both ended up, because both Laura and Katie kind of got their claim to fame by being very Islamophobic and tweeting out anti-Muslim sort of things and kind of trafficking in that sort of alt-rightish area. And now Katie is God knows where because she's afraid to even tell people where she lives, waitressing because she cannot use her journalism degree because she's basically destroyed her career by feeding into this kind of stuff. But it's
so funny.
It's funny, but it's sad, and it kind of goes to that fact that both of these women are they're so young. Like, they're not even 30. And it's like both of their careers are pretty much done. I mean, you've got Laura on one hand who's doubling down because, I mean, what else can she do at this point? But then on the other hand, you've got Katie, who's trying to apologize for what she did. And from what I understand, she's writing a book, and I guess that's going to come out and whatever.
Of course she is. Of course she's writing a book.
Well, I mean, hey, listen, everybody got to pay the bills, okay?
Yeah. Well, we can talk more about that as well. I have so many problems with this piece. I have so many problems with Katie McHugh, and I have so many problems with the piece, and I have so many problems with the reaction to the piece. It's almost worse than what happened with the YouTube piece for the New York Times. It's like, I wonder if people actually read these pieces before they react on Twitter. Because I think what they do is they react to the headline and the photo. And then, like a week later, they'll read the piece and be like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, I already talked about this on Twitter. I'm not gonna even go into it anymore. Because if someone reads this piece, I mean, like, you can finish your point, but I think if someone reads any of these pieces fully and honestly, they'll see the machinery and and sort of the architecture that's a big problem with how they deliver these messages. But yeah, that's a whole different. Anyway, I'll let you continue on your Katie McHugh introduction. Sorry. But
yeah, it's hard. I mean, and for what it's worth, in the piece, Katie says several times, like, I take full responsibility for what I did. I did this to myself. I'm sorry. I'm apologizing. But it's interesting to contrast both of their sort of rises, because Laura did things kind of on her own. Like, she's kind of her own gonzo journalist sort of thing. She used social media. She did all that. Katie came up through, like, traditional media. And I really think that Breitbart kind of fucked her over, if we're being completely honest, by not doing what they're supposed to do. And I have a very traditional, old school idea of what editors are supposed to be doing for especially young writers when they're working for a publication. One of my favorite quotes about editors is from my friend Richard Aberwitz, who said, "The job of an editor is to make sure your writers don't look stupid in public." They let her look stupid in public, and then they throw her under the bus for it. But that's what everybody does now, and it just irritates the fuck out of me. And it just it's a little annoying journalism thing that is one of my personal pet peeves. But go ahead.
But here's the funny thing about that point. First of all, I want to share a funny anecdote. When I talked to Laura, I asked her, I go, how do you recover from this? What do you do? Like, what happens? I mean, you're not going to have a job. You can't really use social media to promote yourself anymore. Your income, your streams of income are going to deplete completely. You're going to be at zero, on the gauge eventually. What do you do? What does Laura Loomer do? She's like, I'd have to change my name. I'd have to change my identity. I'd have to move to the Midwest and be a waiter or a waitress. That's what she said. It's in the story, I think. But that was her, like, she had to go into like a WITSEC situation, right? Where she had to completely abandon her real self and become working class. And that's funny. It's essentially what Katie McHugh has done. But my problem is, first of all, your point on journalism is a very accurate point. I've had editors who I will never work with again because they took my story and rather than editing my story, they adjusted like the headline and they changed they took a paragraph and they moved it and they put some other paragraph, like they made it so more incendiary and they made it more dangerous. And so it left me vulnerable because at the end of the day, the editor will never get the blame.
Yeah.
The editor will always stand behind the brand and disappear into the wilderness while the writer gets destroyed. I've had that situation happening where my editors have completely like let me loose and have never given me have put me in a situation where it's very uncompromising and vulnerable. But a lot of Katie McHugh's problem came from Twitter. I mean, I don't recall a single Katie McHugh article that people were like, oh my God, she needs to be canceled. Like, there was never a piece she wrote for Breitbart or the Daily Caller that was, I mean, sure, it was all the same sort of weird, vaguely white nationalistic kind of anti-Islam stuff that we see from every other writer at Daily Caller or Breitbart, but there was never anything sort of crazy like her tweets. You know, her tweets were like, everything that she ever had that was an issue in her life was from her Twitter. So I can't hold the publication responsible for her, again, going back to the addiction and the weird incentive and the incentivizing of bad behavior that social media does. This is Katie McHugh being a victim of Twitter, I think, in many ways. And again, the BuzzFeed article, no mention of this whatsoever. The BuzzFeed article doesn't bother to mention anything like that would have been mentioned in Jaron Lanier's kind of book about how social media affects our brain and how it forces us to do bad things. McHugh talked about, I think in the piece, that like her bad behavior was being incentivized by like the Breitbart kind of cultish atmosphere. But she never talked about Twitter. Like, how did Twitter never, in this entire profile, I don't know how many words it was very long. It took me like, I remember when I first read it, I was like, holy fucking cow, this is so long. This is annoyingly long. But it's never, the impact of social media on this person's life was never mentioned. Why? So that's a curious blind spot to me on behalf of BuzzFeed and the writer who wrote this, which I think is a big problem. A lot of things are just ignored. I mean, you're ignoring why Katie McHugh suddenly decided to come out and sort of do the mea culpa kind of confessional thing. First of all, she's a Catholic. I would have explored her faith way more because I'm a Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but I was baptized Catholic, and I've had Catholic family members. And, you know, this idea of confessional where you're absolved of your sins, no matter what your sins are, if you go into a confessional with a priest. I mean, this to me is what Katie McHugh was doing. She's absolving herself of her sins. Never once are we discussing or talking about her motivation to do this. The only motivation that I found was that she no longer has a job, she can't pay her bills, and she's depressed, and she's having health issues, and she needs health care, and she wants to promote her book. So if the argument is let's not platform people, right? I mean, BuzzFeed won't let you platform or do a profile on like a Laura Loomer. But if the argument is that we shouldn't platform people because they have bad intentions, what is this? I mean, to me, this is Katie McHugh pulling a fast one on BuzzFeed. What better way to promote her book? What better way to put herself in a position to maybe get a job again and to get more followers and to get more sort of, you know, attention than just saying, oh my God, I fucked up. I'm the apostate story. By the way, right when Charlottesville happened, 3 different members of the quote unquote alt-right who were at Charlottesville, okay, reached out to me and wanted to do the same kind of story. The story of, oh my God, I've been brainwashed and I've been I've been programmed by the alt-right to believe that Islam is destroying the West and white men are being taken apart, and the mob is coming after our Western culture and our faith and all, whatever the white supremacist idiot thinks, right? So I was approached by these guys who want to do stories like that, the sort of, the apology story. And every single individual that I talked to I talked to every single one of these guys on the phone for long periods of time. I concluded fully that they were just trying to recover their career. They had lost their ability to make a living or to be, taken seriously. And they found the only way to do that is to beg for forgiveness. And BuzzFeed, I think with McHugh, I think there was editorial discussions at BuzzFeed with the writer. I forgot her name, Rosie Gray. Rosie Gray. I think there were editorial discussions where she was told that the only way you can do the story is if you spend at least 70% of the story reminding the audience that she's a racist, she's a bigot, and that she's a horrible person, and that all her views are objectionable, and she needs to be taken down, and she can't have a normal life anymore because of what she did. I think the smartest thing the mainstream media has done is they've used alt-right, quote unquote, as the greatest way of dissuading conservatives, young people, from being conservative. Because what better way to propagandize the idea that being conservative is bad for your life and bad for your career than showing a Katie McHugh whose entire life was destroyed by being far to the right of the conservative spectrum, fairly. I mean, she is. But nonetheless, I mean, it's just, that's sort of the architecture of the story. And the photo they used. I mean, how is nobody I was like, okay, if like this will never happen, obviously, but if like the Daily Caller or the Daily Wire did a profile on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this is like a really random, scenario that'll never happen, and they zoomed in on her face and like used this really ugly, like, fluorescent lighting and like used like a Photoshop filter to like show you every wrinkle and every line and every crease on her face, and then they refused in the piece to mention that she has alopecia, right? So she has a skin disorder that makes her look the way she looked. It looked like her fucking eyebrows were stapled on her face. Did you see the photo? Like, it looked like her eyebrows were stapled onto her face.
Yeah, and I was going to try to be nice about the photo because it also looks like she's wearing a wig, but she has alopecia, so like...
That's horrific.
Yeah.
She looks like Michael... She looks like a weird hybrid of Steve Bannon and Michael Jackson. It's like the most horrific... And it's not because she's an ugly woman, per se. She's not. It's like when you take a photo of someone like that and you light it that way and you Photoshop it that way, they're going to look horrific. And what better way to dissuade young conservatives from being conservative than showing you, oh my God, if you decide to be conservative, your health will go down the drain. You'll lose all your ability to make a living. You'll be a monster. And she was wearing like this like weird, like black fur, like almost like Jon Snow at the wall kind of like outfit. Yeah. I mean, it's like, how did this happen? You're telling me, I guarantee you they advised Katie McHugh on what to wear and they had a stylist choose her outfit. I guarantee you that, by the way. There's no way she showed up to a photo shoot wearing a fucking fur coat. Like, it seemed ridiculous to me. And to me, the problem was you're using these people as tools, essentially, to make your argument. It's a think piece. It's not a profile. It's a think piece. It's an opinion piece designed to tell people why it's so bad to be this person. But not just that, because that's obvious. That's obvious, right? It's bad to be this person because it'll destroy your life and your career. But they're trying to say it's bad to be a conservative, even if it not. And it's not very clear that it's bad to be this type of conservative. It's very clear they're saying you can't. The visual, the aesthetics of the piece is very clear that being on the right is going to lead you down a really bad path, and you become conditioned and programmed to be an extremist. And that's a problem I have with the piece. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff. I think there's a lot of effects in the way they approach these profiles. But I don't know. I don't like a profile where it becomes a political argument. She's making a political argument, the writer. She's saying that if you're young and you engage and you get a job at a Breitbart or a Daily Caller, or if you engage with these people, you'll be programmed into being a extremist right winger. Which I don't think she was programmed. I think that's the weirdest part of the story. Did you see those parts where her friends were trying to deprogram her?
Yeah, I wasn't super cool with that language.
What, programmed? She look. None of her views have changed, by the way. I guarantee you, if she believed the stuff that she believed, they haven't changed. I think she just approached it the wrong way. I think the tweets she did and the people she hung out with were objectionable, and they got her in a lot of trouble. So she's like, oh, I fucked up. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think she's like, oh my God, I shouldn't have said that, like, if you just kick every Muslim out of the I don't know, like Europe, you'll have no terrorism. That's a really bad thing to say. But I actually believe that. I just said it the wrong way. I think Katie McHugh believes everything she's ever said and still does. I think that she is a very smart, and she's a survivor is what she is. And this is what survivors do. They reconfigure themselves, and it's no different than, in the wild where a lizard or will change their sort of whatever. They'll adapt to their environment to look like they're, brown in the desert or green in the forest and so forth, so they won't get attacked by predators. She's adjusting. And BuzzFeed, I think, took the bait. Which is ironic, but they don't platform people, right? You don't platform conservatives. You don't profile someone on the right. You don't do an interview with Candace Owens. You won't talk to Charlie Kirk type people, right? But you'll profile someone like Katie McHugh. I think it was a weird. It's interesting, and it's funny that some of the reporting was done by, I think, Joel Bernstein, the guy who essentially took down like Milo and so forth. But like, I wonder how much input he had in the construction of the story, which my guess is a lot by reading it.
It's interesting because I read the piece and I was not so much focused on the things that you were focused on, but just more like her story. And I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. Like, okay, you say this, okay, I will, yeah. I'll take you at face value. I will believe you. Okay. But a point that I think does bear kind of making, especially in relationship to Laura versus Katie, is Laura is, I mean, by all definitions, a true believer. Like, she believes every damn word she says. Like, if she says that she thinks every Muslim person is a terrorist in waiting, she's not playing. She really genuinely believes that.
Right.
Well, I mean, and for what it's worth, I think she's a little mentally off too, and I thought that before I read your piece. Like, there's just
right, of course.
There's something about her that's some people say it's the grift, some people say she's faking. I'm like, you can only fake so much, and I think I think she's genuinely like dead ass crazy. But then there's
go ahead.
But then there's people like Katie where you have to stop and ask yourself, and even she made this point when in the BuzzFeed piece, that like, how much of this is genuine like belief in what you're saying, and how much of it is trolling / owning the libs / trying to be an edgy shitlord, basically, and then you end up taking it just way too damn far.
She's blaming the culture she was surrounded in for her behavior on social media. It's basically what she was essentially saying was the culture at Breitbart and that the owning the libs kind of culture of incentivizing and shaming you for not being part of the team per se, and not sort of doing the things that everyone else is doing. It sort of ostracizes you from the community. I think she's painting the portrait that the far right, Steve Bannon configuration of the far right, is a cult. And Steve Bannon is the cult leader, or was the cult leader, and she was just following orders, and that she'd been programmed. I mean, again, if you said this, and I want to ask you this question: if you believe that she's genuine in her mea culpa or whatever, then you have to then believe she was brainwashed. You have to then believe that she was programmed into being a cyborg for the far right, essentially. And then she somehow got unprogrammed, right? All of a sudden, it's coincidentally, the moment where her wake up moment happened was when she lost all her money and she's writing a book and she doesn't have a job anymore. So is that all of a sudden is her awakening happened at the most advantageous, most opportune moment in her life, which is when she needed to have an awakening. I don't buy it for 1 second. I think it's a complete front. I think she figured out that she has no choice except to ask for forgiveness, because it's the only route she can take. It's no different to me. I'm not saying she's a sociopath because I don't know her. I've never interviewed her. I think Laura Loomer to some degree is a sociopath, by the way, and I said this to her face, so it's not something I'm afraid to say. But I think that McHugh, however you say it, I think that she's doing what a classic sort of high-functioning sociopath does. They do whatever they have to do to escape the situation they're in that is a problem for them. So she's recorrecting the situation to the best of her abilities, the smartest, most tactful. The fact that she convinced a BuzzFeed to profile her in this regard is, to me, shocking. It's impressive, actually. I think she's actually very impressive in her ability to renegotiate her career, because she's a podcast and a book away from complete redemption. And I know no one believes that. Oh my gosh, she's never going to be forgiven for this. She's a podcast and a book away from complete redemption to a job like a columnist at the Washington Post. I'm telling you, if the book is a full-blown 250-page criticism of the alt-right, an expose of the problematic far right, and she does a podcast where all she talks about is how you need to escape the alt-right and you need to, she's basically an advocate for the left, right? If she does that, all is forgiven. She'll have a job, she'll have a career, and she'll have a very normal life again.
Possibly.
So I don't buy it for 1 second. Yeah, I don't buy it for 1 second.
Possibly, because the reactions I saw to the piece were anywhere ranging from, why are you even talking to this woman, to fuck Katie McHugh. So I think you're giving a little more capacity for forgiveness than what actually exists right now. But as far as the programming, deprogramming thing for Katie, and this is the cynic in me, for me to think that she was programmed and deprogrammed, I would have to believe that she ever really believed in any of this shit in the first place. Which, for some of these people, I have my doubts.
Right.
I have my genuine doubts, because when you are somebody who wants to gain social media clout, and you see that doing a certain thing or posting certain things or acting a certain way will get you the attention that you're seeking, you will do that, whether or not you actually genuinely believe in the shit that you're saying or not. And I know that's also a refuge that a lot of people from the alt-right go to. Is like, I was just trolling, I was just joking. But at some point, it's like, okay, did you ever actually believe this shit? Or was this all just to get a job, to get attention, to gain social media clout? I mean, I honestly question at some point who actually genuinely believes it.
Yeah, that's a thing. I had an interesting discussion last night with a friend of mine who works in conservative media. He's a hardcore, I guess you could say far right. And we had a discussion about Justin Amash, and I think Justin Amash is great. He's the kind of conservative that I would vote for. But we had an interesting conversation about his motivations, and the individual I was talking to had some very sort of bizarre theories behind why Amash opposes Trump. And then we came to this weird conclusion: how do we ever know the motivations? Like, what are Trump's motivations for the wall? Like, why does he want to build a wall? Does he believe that it's the best approach to stopping illegal immigration? Does he believe it's a great campaigning tactic because he wants to get a second term and he just wants to leave his like legacy or mark behind on the country that he thinks will be his like great? Is it just like what he does because he's a building real estate guy and he wants to build a giant wall because that's just his like forte? What's the motivation? We don't know. We'll never know. We'll never really know the motivation behind anyone's actions. There's no way to actually diagnose why Laura Loomer believes or says that every Muslim is a threat. She believes every Muslim is potentially jihadist, right? She says she believes that every Muslim is fundamentally sort of has a nature and the philosophical basis to
like
be
the will is there
to be a terrorist, right? Not just to be like radical, to be an actual dangerous person. That's crazy. That's like fantasy speak to people like you and I assume, at least to you. I think it's like, okay, so does she really believe this, or is she saying it because she knows that she's going to get funding and she's going to get like a platform and she's going to get a lot of followers? And the other question is, do they start believing their own bullshit after a while? I think what happens is they start believing this after a certain period of time of just saying it over and over. They're conditioning themselves. What they do is they brainwash themselves into believing the shit they're saying. I don't think anybody's programming these people. I don't think Katie McHugh was brainwashed. I don't think Steve Bannon had some like crazy hypnotic hold over her and like turned her into this like cyborg. I don't think like, Project Veritas took this like young girl in college, Laura Loomer, and transformed her into some alt-right, protesting machine or something. But I think they brainwash themselves because they start telling themselves this is true because if I don't believe it, I can't sell it. So they condition themselves to believe their beliefs in a weird way, and then they take it to the streets and they sell it. It's like a salesman. If you're a great salesman, you better believe you're selling a good product, right? Like if you're selling vacuums door to door, you're gonna have to convince yourself you're selling the best fucking vacuum in the world, or no one's gonna buy it. I worked in marketing for 5 years in public relations. I literally compare it to door to door sales because I had to I remember my boss came into the office one day and said, Art, we have a microwave oven company, okay? We secure the client. It's a microwave oven. You're going to have to get this microwave oven in the New York Times. If you don't get the microwave oven in the New York Times, we're not giving you a promotion. He didn't say it in those exact words, but that was basically what was happening. I had to convince the New York Times to write about a fucking microwave oven, right? I had a few months to do this. And I had to convince myself that was the greatest microwave oven that had ever been invented in the history of mankind. And I did. I convinced myself that this was the most amazing product in history, and I sold it, and I got it into the New York Times. Now, that's what I think Laura Loomer is doing. That's what I think Katie McHugh did. They convinced themselves that Islam is the greatest threat to Western civilization. They believe that fully at this point, and now they're selling it. They're selling it so hard that they become salesmen for this really dangerous cause. That every rational person agrees that there's good. There's good people in every faith, and there's very extreme kind of nutcases in every faith. And I think Islam's no different, right? Obviously. And I think there's right now in the civilization we live in, Islam's a little more prehistoric, for example, a little more ancient than, let's say, Catholicism or, Mormonism, in the sense that they're sort of still, a little bit in the Dark Ages, so there's more problems with Islam than there is, let's say, even Scientology or something, whatever. But like, yeah, so I think she's programmed herself. I don't think they're being brainwashed. That's the part that I found problematic about the piece. And I hate using that word, but that's the problem. That's the part that I found. What's funny? I said this to somebody when I read the BuzzFeed piece. It seemed like the writer was so like worried about writing about this person that every sentence had to be a reaffirmation or reminder to the audience that Katie McHugh is a racist. Katie McHugh is a bigot. Katie McHugh is anti-Islam. Okay, we get that. We got that in the first fucking paragraph. You don't have to say that every paragraph. You're distracting from what I believe could have been an interesting profile of her motivations. Why did she do this in the first place? Where did she grow up? What were her parents like? What were Katie McHugh's mom and dad like? I mean, why did this young, innocent – everyone's young and innocent at some point, right? How did it become corrupted? Like even a fucking documentary like – and this is a bad example, but please go with me here. Like a documentary like the Finding Neverland documentary, right? Is that what it was called? The Michael Jackson documentary?
Yeah.
So when you watch that, the entire thing is really about how these kids got to the point where they got sexually assaulted or supposedly allegedly got sexually assaulted. Why did they get to this point where they had fucked up parents, right? They had parents who were like putting their kids in compromising situations. How did Katie McHugh get to the point where she wanted to even work for fucking Daily Caller? Like what drove her to the point where she believed Islam was this great threat? Yeah, they talk about the books she read and so forth, but I don't know. See, for me with Laura Loomer, what was interesting was I think a lot of this goes back to 9/11. I think a lot of this goes back to being 7, 8 years old, maybe 10 or 11, and witnessing the crimes that happened on September 11th. And then the war on terror propaganda on Fox News. And then, everyone around you and the things people were saying about radical Islam, and then watching videos of beheadings on YouTube. And yeah, our country essentially created an entire giant long-term propaganda campaign to convince these kids that Islam is the greatest threat to civilization. George W. Bush's greatest campaign was convincing everybody that Islam was the greatest threat to Western, even though he would say, there's good and bad Muslims, and it's not just, there's extreme and there's rational sort of normal Islam, and let's not attack we're not at war with Islam, right? But even though they said that, at the end of the day, the argument was, the subtext, the sort of the theme parable of it all was, Islam's a major threat to Western civilization and it has to be stopped. And these kids, 7 or 8 years old, I think got seduced into that thinking. To me, that's what an interesting story would be, or a book would be, to document how these sort of people like even Milo, Katie McHugh, and Laura Loomer, all people like under 30, really young, how they were seduced into this climate of extremism. And no one does that because you can't humanize Katie McHugh, right? BuzzFeed's not allowed to humanize Katie McHugh, so they have to talk about it like she's a fucking cyborg, this dehumanized, like reprogrammed right-wing robot who's not a human being, who never went to high school. What was Katie McHugh like in high school? Didn't you like for 1 second think about that when you read that story? That's what I thought about. I go, what was she like in high school? What did she go through? What kind of group was she a part of? Was she popular? Was she prom queen? Was she like hated? Was she like the most? Was she listening to Nine Inch Nails in the corner of her like cafeteria by herself, wearing all black and depressed? Was she the popular cheerleader kid? I don't know. That to me is fascinating. That to me is a profile. But I think what we read was an argument. Deriding their alt-right and using someone from the alt-right to like use that argument to make that argument. It was a think piece. So anyway.
Yeah, and this is a conversation that we could probably have for the next about 3 to 4 hours, but because it is fascinating. It's like, and it was a thought that I had when I was reading the Laura Loomer piece, is that she was exposed to 9/11 like so young. She was like 8, 9 years old.
Yeah, she was 8 years old in Arizona, in a very like clean suburb, and she was like, "Oh my God, like we're at war with Islam."
Yeah, and I was like, I was 19. So yeah. My experience with it is probably a lot different than people 10 years younger than me. And I think there is something to be discussed there of people who grew up in that era. Like, obviously 19, I wasn't like super old or anything, but it's a lot different than being like between 5 to 10 and growing up your whole life under that message, especially like you said, under W, where it was like, Islam is the greatest threat to everything, everywhere, at all times, and it is bad and we must eradicate it. Like, I do imagine that would completely jade somebody's view on Islam. But
imagine if you're slightly mentally not all there, and that's happening as well. And this is not being discussed. Why is this not part of a story? If you're going to diagnose someone for being brainwashed or why they were seduced into the alt-right, why is it purely a tactic to try to like discourage people from joining the alt-right? Like, I felt like that was the story's impetus, was this is why you shouldn't join the alt-right. Well, yeah, I know, we get that. I assume every rational person at this point understands why you shouldn't be a racist and a bigot. But why did she become that? That no one cares about that. And I found that to me is the most interesting story. That's what I tried to do with Milo. I spent 2 weeks with Milo when I profiled him for Playboy. I spent 2 weeks, and and this is like, I never really talked about this, but my entire goal was to get Milo to open up and be vulnerable and explain to me why he became who he became. I wanted to meet Milo's parents. I wanted to meet Milo's husband. I wanted to meet Milo's friends. I wanted to talk to his childhood friends. I wanted to understand what happens that someone becomes with this. This is not normal. This is not you and I. This is not like, I grew up in a very normal suburban world. Nobody's like this, okay? This is not a normal behavior. This is something you've been broken at some point, and you've been acclimated into this weird sort of behavior or character. He's playing a character, but why is he playing this character? Does he just want to be famous? Okay, so why do these young millennials all want to be famous? That's not normal. When I grew up, the world that you and I grew up in, did everybody want to be famous? No. Like, most people do not want to be famous. Most people just want to get married and have kids and work at a 9-to-5 job and watch sports. Now they all want to be political superstars. Well, why? Why does everyone want to be a famous political reality TV show star? What has driven us to this point of complete toxic celebrity? And no one's trying to figure that out, because if you try to figure that out, you're humanizing your subject. And it's like the Saul Alinsky sort of tactic, right? You dehumanize your enemies. So BuzzFeed is dehumanizing Katie McHugh, not just with the photo, right? Like, there's like this weird fucked up marionette photo with her eyebrows stapled onto her face and her skin's like pasty and peeling off her. It's horrific. And it's not horrific because this woman's a fairly normal looking woman. It's horrific because the way they shot it. And they're trying to tell you, they're trying to send you a message rather than educating you and releasing information. To me, journalism is releasing information and not controlling it. It's the opposite of marketing, right? Marketing and PR is controlling information, which is what I did for 5 years. So I know the difference. But BuzzFeed is engaging in a weird marketing kind of article. It's like a combination of marketing and journalism. I should never have to read a story and like every paragraph feel like I'm being told exactly what you want me to believe. That should never be the feeling in a profile, right? That can be the feeling in an argument, in an opinion piece, but in a profile, yeah. I mean, we could have an entire discussion about the state of journalism, but I won't waste too much time on that. But I just think that it was an unfortunate. I don't know. I just always want to figure out why these individuals become what they become, and nobody wants to explore that. So I think it's a tragedy.
Yeah, and I think it's because we're still in this kind of environment where doing those kind of pieces is not 100% supported. And there is, like I said, a lot of pushback behind people even wanting to talk to these people and finding outlets that will support doing pieces on these people in the way that we would like to see it done. But to kind of bring it back to where we all kind of started with Twitter, and that is this current idea that Twitter is broken and needs to be fixed. And
it can't be fixed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But, I mean, and that's a point that I've made, is that so much of what is being asked right now of social media is an impossible ask, because the things that you want them to do are just physically not possible for them to do. Like, you can't, people keep saying like, oh, we have to monitor, we have to make sure the bad things don't get on the platforms. It's like, the manpower isn't there, the AI isn't there, but we're starting to see this really weird push on both sides to have the government do the thing to fix the internet and to fix social media. And obviously my views on that should be relatively obvious.
Right.
But aside that, this is just horrible, bad, awful, no good, because these people know fuck all about social media. And if you've ever watched any of the tech hearings, it's like, oh my God, these people are old as dirt and have never used these platforms before.
Right.
But there
Totally.
is, I will entertain the argument that, okay, something needs to be done, and nobody can quite figure out what the thing is. I have an idea what the thing should be. I know what it won't be, because that would require way too much personal responsibility from people. But I think, and I want to flip this idea past you, is maybe the better idea is not to try to figure out what we do want, but to figure out what we don't want to see happen to social media, as far as who gets to regulate what and when and where, and then maybe work in towards like a middle compromise that will make everybody at least somewhat comfortable, if not entirely 100% happy, because that's never going to happen on this topic. I've given up on that. But
it's like it's the same, by the way, it's the same problem we're having with the discussion of gun control. But go on, I'll get into that more.
But yeah, I mean, I think that maybe this is one of those situations, and this is another one that, like, everybody on the right and on the left, well, not everybody, but understand what I mean, are starting to call for government intervention. And I'm like, I refuse to believe that this is the one area where there is no market solution to this problem, that it has to be government. And obviously that completely squicks me out. But I wanted to get your idea on the idea of, like, the negative argument of trying to figure out what we don't want and work inward from there.
Well, I'm going to full on just admit something, because I think someone's going to go on my Twitter and find it. Early on, when a lot of the deplatforming was happening, this is before like Alex Jones, and I think even this is like a while ago, I was for regulation for a period of time. It was my conservative instincts were that there's a liberal bias at these organizations, and these organizations are essentially operating like telecommunication companies, and we can't avoid them. They are our only, platform to communicate in this manner. They have replaced the phone call. They have replaced every major form of communication. It is the predominant form of communication in this country, social media. Direct messages are used more often than text messages for some kids. They use Twitter, or they used Messenger on Facebook more than they even use their own phones at some point. So I think that was my first impulse. But then I moved away from that, because I realized the more research I did, like when I read, I think a book everybody should read, everyone in America should be required to read 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts by Jaron Lanier. Like, if you this is the guy who pioneered virtual reality, right? He talked to Sean Parker. He's worked in Silicon Valley. I mean, he is an expert. If you read a book like that and you walk away from that book and you don't see the inherent unsolvable problem that is social media, then you're an idiot, basically, because it's very obvious. This cannot be solved with regulation. This is not about liberal media bias. This is not about this is not about Mark Zuckerberg being some Martian who's sitting in some tower with like an evil genius who's like controlling us, like as if we're all like little like marionettes and so forth. It's not about that. All that needs to be ignored. The problem is that social media is out of the control of people who created it. Jack Dorsey, if you saw him on Joe Rogan, which I think most people did, you would have the immediate sense that I got was, this is a good guy. I've talked to Jack before. He's a good guy. Like, this is a guy who tried to create something that was like a mass text forum where people can discuss whatever they wanted to discuss. He had no idea he was going to be used to be a political propaganda tool. Twitter is now the most powerful and the most potent propaganda tool in all of civilization. It is the most used and the most popular propaganda platform in all of civilization. And I think it's dangerous from that perspective. But you can't fix it. You can't regulate it. What are you going to do? Deplatform everybody? You can't. How do you determine what is propaganda and what is not propaganda? That is an impossible task. I see videos by conservatives that I'm actually friends with, right? I see them post videos where they take the comment. The greatest problem I have is the videos. You see videos being posted, right? And then their explanation of the video is complete rubbish. It's like taking someone out of context, full-blown lie, and utter propaganda. And what do you do? How do you regulate that? Do you just do no videos? Do you have someone regulating the messaging on Twitter? Like, you can't. What do you do? I mean, there's no way to regulate this, and there is no market-based solution either. By the way, I think the libertarian point of view is, there'll be other social media platforms that emerge that compete. Like Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin are creating their own platform. Well, I think that's a mistake. We don't need more social media. We need less social media. We need to unplug. We need to detoxify from this nonsense and stupidity that we've entrapped ourselves in. And we need to walk away from it before it destroys us, before it becomes Terminator, before it becomes the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica and destroys all of civilization. I know it sounds comedic, and I'm making sort of a hyperbolic kind of joke about it, but it really is that kind of a problem. And I think that if you view it as if you view the need to regulate social media, you're trying to regulate gun. You're trying to regulate the reason why we have mass shootings in this country. Why do we have mass shootings in this country? Okay, nobody wants to figure that out. All they want to do is ban guns, or they want to just have no gun laws because that's their sort of, NRA incentivized sort of thinking and lifestyle, right? Both sides are wrong. Both sides are completely wrong about the gun control. I remember this right after Columbine. Newsweek did a really phenomenal spread on the psychology of the mass shooter. They were trying to figure out, this is the first time we had a major sort of media grabbing mass shooting in this country, right? And so they were trying to figure out why. Why does someone become a mass shooter? Like, why were these kids radicalized to the point where they fucking took guns into their school and had freaking like smoke bombs and so forth? And what happens? So that's what we got to figure out with social media. It's not should we regulate it? Why are we doing bad things on social media? Like, why are we using it are human beings incapable of using it for good? And also, like, it's the same thing with shootings. It's like, why are we having mass shootings? Are there economic factors? Is it boredom? Is it some sort of weird, I don't know, like, is it video games? Is it first person shooters? Are they all contributing factors? Is it the stress and the paranoia of living in the world we live in today? Is it post 9/11 sort of mental instability and struggles that go on with, like, college debt? And I don't know what it is, but let's figure that out. So that to me is, no, I don't support regulation. So we're on the same page for different reasons. I don't support regulation at all. I think it's a waste of time. It's the same. I don't support regulation of guns either. I don't support. I think we should have some gun laws just because I want to appease the left for the most part. But I don't really think they're going to work. I don't think gun laws are going to prevent mass shootings at all. I don't think it's going to reduce a single percentage of mass shootings in this country or mass violence. Let's put it that way, right? Like, there's going to be other ways to, annihilate a group of people versus using a machine gun or an AR-15. Get rid of AR-15. Someone will use something else. It's like, get rid of social media. Well, get rid of Twitter, right? Or like, let's regulate Twitter. Well, someone will create an unregulated Twitter somewhere in some server somewhere, right? I mean, it's like, you can't stop this from happening. You can't stop people from being basically uncontrollable, vindictive trolls. You can't stop them from behaving, but why are they that way? The minute we figure out why they're that way, we can actually diagnose it and solve the problem. But nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, and that's
I just don't get it.
And that's kind of where I'm coming down on it. Is like, obviously, I am very anti-regulation on damn near everything, but
sure.
I think a lot of people blame the platforms for our behavior. Like, Twitter is just Twitter. Right. Like, it exists. They don't post the content. They don't interact with anybody. It's us. Right. So if you really want to fix social media, we all have to do the heavy lifting ourselves of being better people on social media. But it's become this thing where nobody really wants to do that. And there's this deplatforming, to me, has created this environment where it's like this weird entitlement environment where one side views like they're entitled to a platform and the other side views that like they're entitled to a specifically curated experience, and both are wrong. Right. Like, it's up to you as a person to wall your own garden however you see fit, and that's on you. And please stop asking platforms to do the work that you should be doing for yourself. And that's kind of where I've come down on this. But like I said, I know that's never going to happen because, again, that requires personal responsibility, which apparently nobody wants to do in this particular situation. Because, sure. I mean, the tools are there. Like, you can do whatever it is you want to do. Like, you can mute people, you can block people, you can mute words from showing up on your TL, you can follow whoever you want to follow or not. But apparently that's too difficult for some people to figure out, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Well, it's I don't know. There's a lot of different weird anecdotes and analogies that can be used, but I agree and I disagree. I agree with the point of view that you have that we shouldn't regulate it, but I disagree that the problem isn't inherently in the machinery of social media. I think that is a big part of the problem. That's a culprit that is not being addressed, that's being completely ignored for reasons that I can't even understand. So that is something that needs to be addressed. The other thing is I think, what do we do to stop people from but young kids have no, like 5 or 6 years old, they're being introduced to like their iPad, and before you know it, they're on Instagram or YouTube looking at videos, and then they have Twitter. They don't know any better. Like, they're not being taught. The parents, I don't know. I guess, are parents having these discussions with their kids now? I don't know. Like, do you sit down with your kids and tell them about the risk factors of social media and how to? We don't even understand it ourselves. So there needs to be like a book. There needs to be an education. Like, I remember in the 50s, who was it? God, who was it? The doctor who like advised parents on how to like raise their children. Oh. What was his name? Dr. Spock.
Yeah.
So yeah, he had this book, and like he taught mothers and fathers how to like basically like raise a baby, and it was used, and it was like very effective, and it was, you know, for the most part until recently, until like the progressive sort of movement figured out that everything that happened before everything that's happened before 2011 was like racist and homophobic and whatever. So they changed everything. But like, you know, that's what we need. We need like a guide on how to teach children about how social media is just fake and it's pointless and it's wrong and you shouldn't be even using it. And if you ever use it, just use it to promote your work or something and walk away and don't take it seriously. I think that the social media companies are trying to fix the problem, but they can't. Again, you look at the Jack Dorsey interview on Rogan. He seems helpless. He's like, I have no idea what to do. He's talking about the ordering. He talked about the, I guess their community guidelines or something, and he talked about how like at the front was copyright infringement and stuff like that, and at the bottom was stuff about like physical safety and so forth. And he's like, well, we have to change the order of that. We have to put physical safety at the top, and we have to put community guidelines at the bottom. And then Joe Rogan was like, what does it matter? What does the order matter? It doesn't even, there's no relevancy here. He's like, well, order matters. And like, this guy is like, is this what Jack Dorsey's thinking about? Is he like sitting there like talking about the fucking order of his, like, it just, they're lost. They can't solve the problem. It's out of their hands. If you watch like RoboCop, it was like OCP created these like robot cops essentially, right, to police Detroit because the crime had gotten so bad, and it was a better, you know, it was just and then before they knew it, the robot cop, you know, the technology had gotten out of their hands, and it had become rogue, and it was being used by evil people to do bad things, to commit more crime, so forth. So that's what's happening with social media. You can't fix it by regulating it. I think what we have to do is we have to spend a good decade, unfortunately, educating people on why we shouldn't use social media. And there needs to be a very strong advocate, someone who's very influential, powerful, like a Bill Gates, who has a lot of money, has a lot of influence, who creates a program or creates a campaign, the same way we fought cigarette smoking, the same way we fought, you know, other problems in society. We need to fight the use of social media the same way we fought the tobacco industry. And we essentially ended it, right? We ended teen smoking until the fucking vaping thing happened. We ended teen smoking how do we do that? We did it with marketing, with very ingenious marketing. And that's how we stop. That's how we fix the social media problem. That's what we have to use a decade-long campaign of marketing to treat it like it's a joke and end it completely. And the only people who will be on Twitter are journalists, which is basically what it is now anyway, right? Where like, the only people on Twitter are like journalists or like celebrities. Really, I mean, and like trolls, but like really, it's not that many people. It's not really like, it's in no way significant compared to Instagram, for example. But yeah, I don't know. That's what I think should happen. How do we market or PR or quote unquote reprogram people to find this thing to be a disgusting and horrible platform that leads to nothing but negativity in your life? I think people are having sleeping issues. I think people are having happiness, like they're being depressed. I think the rise in this openness about mental health is not necessarily an openness about mental health. I think people are having more mental health issues because of social media. That's what I believe. I mean, I think it needs to go away. And I think how it goes away is it's not a market-based solution. It's not a government solution. It's education.
Fair enough, but on that point, since I've sucked up enough of your time already, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So, as always, you know what to do at this point. Plug your stuff.
Yeah, not much. I mean, you can check me out on Twitter at Art Tavana. It's just so funny. I'm telling people to like disconnect from social media, and I'm plugging my Twitter. That's how fucked up we are. That's seriously like how deranged this whole thing is. But yeah, so just get me on Twitter at Art Tavana. And I got a book coming out in 2011. It's like a social and aesthetic history of Guns N' Roses. I've been working on it for like 3 years. It's brutal, but it's going to be fantastic. So that's 2011. Otherwise, nothing really else to report. So that's pretty much it. And my only suggestion is everybody, who listens to this should read the Jaron Lanier book and should start studying the impact social media has on your brain and how it rewires your brain and affects you on a very sort of deeply psychological level. The chemistry of your brain is being affected by it. So you have to really think about it. And I know it sounds conspiratorial and it sounds like I'm some some weird, fantasist or whatever. But no, there's actual there's studies and there's research. I mean, it's affecting us, and we all need to be a little more careful about how we interact with it.
All right, and I've got to pick up that book too to add to my pile of social media books to read.
I know.
But thank you, as always, for sitting down and talking to me. I always appreciate it.
It was very fun. Thank you for taking the time and just inviting me over.
All right, cool. Thanks. I'll talk to you next time. So that was Art and I's conversation about social media and about all sorts of other things. Obviously, we always get off topic and we always end up going long, and it always ends up being interesting though. And I hope that you guys find it as interesting and as enjoyable as we find making these. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. And as always, if you did make it this far, thank you for listening. And if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. Take care, and until next time.